Good afternoon, Jori. How the heck are you?
Good afternoon. I'm doing well. How are you guys doing? Is it warmer down in Dallas than it is here in New York?
It probably is. It's warmed up the last couple of days. I think we're probably mid-50s right now. How you guys doing up there?
Okay, I will say right now it's 30s, although it's going down to single digits. So I got my run in today, but earlier I was checking the weather and I had it on Dallas instead, and I was disappointed when it was not accurate.
Well, we're excited to have you on here, Jori, and we understand right now the Kellen Moore virtual interview or whatever is going on as we speak. What do you think? Would this be a good hire for the Cowboys?
Yes, I think so. I think what's interesting, and yes, I was told that interview was scheduled to start on Zoom at 3 o'clock Central, so happening right now. Technically, by league rules, they have up to 3 hours. But I would think it's absolutely reasonable to consider him a favorite for the job and arguably the favorite. I think when you look at it, all coaches want certain things. Of course, you want someone with scheme. Of course, you want someone who's a leader. But the two things that Jerry Jones wants, that I think not everyone wants, is experience at a high level as well as hey, you have some sort of ability to understand the Cowboys dynamic, understand what's going on with this franchise. And that's something that Kellen Moore has. And then you see, okay, he's done well at other stops. So I would say absolutely he should be up there.
What's the relationship like between Kellen and Dak? I always assumed they had a very strong one. I mean, how much do you think Dak factors into this head coaching search?
I mean, look, I think that when you ask how he factors into it, there's how he factors into in terms of what they're looking for and how he factors into in terms of will he be asked directly what his voice is. I don't think someone like Jerry knows what Dak wants, and I also think that Jerry kind of says, I'll listen to a lot of people, but ultimately it's my decision. But when you look at it, what this coach should be hired to do is maximize Dak Prescott, because that's where your biggest financial investment's gone. That's where you're going to be paying $60 million a year starting this year. And Kellen understands Dak as a player. He understands his development. He saw him from backup quarterback to quarterback coach to offensive coordinator. And the other thing I'll give Kellen credit for is both from an interpersonal dynamic and from a schematic dynamic. I think in Philadelphia, they had a lot of issues on offense this year, and I get that he's got Saquon Barkley and he's got the talent, but I still think that Kellen has smoothed a lot of things over in Philadelphia this year, and he's realized sometimes the best way to get the most out of your quarterback is with an offensive line and a run game that's balancing it out, and I think he would want to bring that back.
Was there ever any friction when it came to the dynamic with Mike, Kellen, and Dak, and with Mike no longer here, maybe that just it goes away and Kellen and Dak would work seamlessly?
I mean, I know you guys talked about this earlier on this week with Bobby, and I think the way I look at it is Mike McCarthy's a Pittsburgh guy, and he has his line, conflict is good, conflict is healthy. Then you have Dak Prescott, who's been in this league for an increasingly long time, and he knows what he wants, and he knows what works for him, as any veteran quarterback increasingly does. And so I think when you have two coaches in Kellen and Mike who don't come from the exact same offensive philosophy, they're not going to see eye to eye. But I think when I talk about friction, I'm like, well, is it that people are unhappy with each other or that they're having healthy disagreement? Because if they're never disagreeing, I think that's when you're doing something wrong in an organization.
Jori Epstein, Yahoo Sports with you here. Do you think this search is going to take a considerable time from here to the conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest question will be who do they want and how does the playoff advancement impact that? Because, yes, they're interviewing Kellen virtually right now, is my understanding, but they're not allowed to interview him in person until the Eagles are out. And so I think that that's probably going to be the biggest indication of how long this is going to take, is that will they be able to interview the guys they want in the timeline? I mean, if Detroit loses, will they want to bring Aaron Glenn in? Because he's interesting to me, because I think when you look at it, you say, well, most of these guys don't have Cowboys experience, but Aaron Glenn actually did play for the Cowboys a couple of years, and they could say, well, Parcells believes in him, so you should too. So that's kind of like the wild card there.
Now, when it comes to just the way they're conducting this, do you think they were caught off guard by Mike saying thanks but no thanks, and they're kind of in scramble mode at this point?
The reason I don't believe scramble mode is, yes, it is atypical in the NFL to not figure this out by the end of the season. I mean, the Patriots got rid of Gerard Mayo day of. Most people got rid of their coach at the latest by the next day. But also, realistically, other than the Patriots and Mike Vrabel, who, by the way, I understand Mike Vrabel was a top coaching candidate. The Patriots also were sure Gerard Mayo was the guy last year. So I think we have to have a little bit of healthy skepticism there. Other than that, no teams have moved forward with this. It's not like because Ben Johnson met with the team last week, like he's now not going to want to talk to someone else. Like, no one's even visited him in person yet. So while I don't think the Cowboys are going to be the top candidate for a guy like Ben Johnson for some of the reasons we've talked about, I don't think that the timeline of Mike McCarthy's dismissal is going to impact that.
Jori, when we look at these candidates, though, and I guess kind of feel, is there anybody in that building, the Cowboys, that are going to resist Jerry if he really wants a guy? Is there anybody going to stand up, or because likely this will be his last coaching hire? But is there anybody in that building that will stand up to him and say, "No, we need to think about this direction"?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at it, Broadus, you know this as well as anyone, having worked in the building, like it's Jerry number one, and then I would say Steven's definitely number two. And I think we all know the famous example of, hey, Jerry wanted Johnny Manziel, and Steven and some others are like, actually, Zach Martin, and it worked out really well. But when it comes down to it, I think head coach Jerry probably has even stronger opinions on than some of the players, and Steven Moore believes that, hey, if your head coach is your CEO and Jerry's the business guy, maybe other guys have a little bit more ability on that football side to figure out, but not the CEO side. I don't see Jerry allowing anyone to overturn a strong conviction, but I think if he's between two people and Steven thinks one thing, or Todd Williams, or some of those other guys who are very well respected in that organization, Jason Kellen, I would put on that list, I think those guys could influence it and can get someone in the building to interview, but ultimately this is Jerry's decision.
Jori Epstein with us here, Yahoo Sports senior NFL reporter. Jori, when it comes to Jerry, I wonder now, like as you've been in New York and you're covering the rest of the league, well, what is the perception of this job? I think we once considered it one of the top jobs in all of sports, but even Troy Aikman, a legend here, was saying he doesn't know if it's really that coveted a job anymore.
Can I tell you guys, everyone went crazy about the Troy comments, and I understand why to some degree, but let's not pretend like Troy has never criticized the Cowboys before and that he hasn't done it recently. I mean, he doesn't do it very often. We know that Troy and Jerry don't see eye to eye on things. I think they get along well interpersonally for the most part, especially now that Jimmy's in the Ring of Honor. But I was not so surprised by those comments because I think Troy believes an organization should be run a certain way. Jerry runs it a different way, and Troy thinks that way is not coveted. Okay. I understand, again, the fact that he was saying that and it was public and it was on national television, but that's kind of how I view it. In terms of Jerry, I think it depends which element of ownership you're talking about because, again, I'm in New York. The Giants, I think, they're not a good team right now, but everyone respects the Maras generally as people. The Jets, Woody Johnson, not well respected as an owner, as a person. I mean, obviously we've seen a lot of the Jets reports coming out. So I think that yes, there are some. What do you want out of an owner is what I would ask in terms of how coveted this job is. Do you want an owner who's going to leave you alone? Well, then Jerry Jones is not your guy. Do you want an owner who's going to be extremely loyal and who's going to generally allow you to learn and grow on the job with one of the more talented rosters in the league? Then, yeah, the Cowboys have that. If I'm looking at the rosters that the Cowboys have or the Saints have, I want the Cowboys roster. Jacksonville and Chicago, too, I would say, overall have weaker rosters, so maybe those guys have more arm talent, but they haven't proven more than Dak has in the league. And so I think that their ceiling is probably higher, but their floors are lower. And so I think when you look at it, there's just so much talent on this roster, especially that's why I keep saying a guy like Robert Saleh for defensive coordinator. You should be able to get good coordinators in the building, especially on defense if you go offensive coach, because you have the talent that will elevate that coordinator on a really public stage with a lot of primetime games to the next level because they'll have the talent to go run what he wants.
Okay, yeah. Speaking of a guy like Saleh, who do you expect to be? What names could be considered for Kellen's staff if he does get the job?
Yeah, well, I'll say something about Kellen because I think that none of us probably, maybe not us. I think schematically he's extremely well respected. I think a lot of the number one question people probably have is if you've seen Kellen's presence for all of these years, how is that going to work in the head coaching job? And I remember one time a few years back, teams were starting to interview Kellen and DQ for head coaching jobs, and I was still covering the Cowboys at the time, and I had an executive reach out to me and say, hey, what do you want us to know about these two? And I felt like schematically I could talk about both of them, but from a presence standpoint, I knew a lot more about DQ at that time. And I went to Dak then and I said, hey, teams are asking me about Kellen, and I don't have something bad to say about him, but I don't feel like I get a full sense of his personality. You guys clearly love him. Tell me what I'm missing so that I can tell these teams so that they're getting a fair understanding of him. And Dak laughs and goes, well, we like that. We don't want you guys to see everything. I like that he keeps things close to the vest. And I understood it at the time, but I also think that if he's in a head coaching role, you will have to show a little bit more of that, because I always tell people when I'm trying to write their stories, the narrative is out there. Do you want to include your voice in it or not? And as head coach, you want to include your voice. What I would say in terms of the staff, though, is another thing that's interesting is look at Minnesota, look at Cleveland. They've got pretty cerebral head coaches in Kevin O'Connell and Kevin Stefanski. I don't know why every head coach in the league has like one of three names, like Mike, Kevin, and Dan. But I think that when you look at this, those cerebral guys got fiery defensive coordinators like Brian Flores or Jim Schwartz. And so that's what you would want for if you're Kellen, because you want your staff to have different types of energies so that every type of energy is represented to connect with different type of players.
Jori, another injury for Dak that requires surgery. Will he come back in 2025 as essentially the same athlete, the same caliber of player that he was to start this past season?
I mean, I think only God exactly knows how this recovery is going to go. But I think when you look at the body of evidence we have, there are guys like, even I would say when you look at Deshaun Watson's recent injury, who have struggled to come back from previous injuries and be the same guy. I don't really think we've seen that from Dak. I mean, maybe he's not Mississippi State scrambling, which, by the way, is why I think Brian Johnson over in Washington is someone who would be interesting to get in the building, because he was with Dak when he was Mississippi State scrambling. But I think that other than that, like, Dak's biggest strengths are his processing, are the way he sees the field, all the way he can read defenses, get the ball out, work with all the different elements. And I don't think his lower body is going to be a factor. I think as long as he's mobile enough to be in the pocket and move around in the pocket, and maybe scramble like a couple times a game, and there are some people in the building who would like him to do that a little bit more, he's not going to be Lamar Jackson or even Jalen Hurts. That's not the strength of Dak Prescott.
Sounds like you're dodging traffic up there in the Big Apple. Jori, thank you so much for your insights and your report, and have a great weekend.
Great to talk to you guys.